Zach Osterman with us here on 365 Sports. He covers Indiana football for the Indy Star. And Zach, this is such a crazy season that is going on with Indiana and Curt Cignetti. Google me, I win is probably going to be the top selling T-shirt in the Big Ten this year. Other than I wouldn't call it major talent infusion. I mean, like, he got transfers in, but other people have done like larger roster rebuilds. What has he brought that they were missing?
I think you do have to start with like the confidence that he's provided, the success that he's kind of been able to use to ground, everything he sort of asked of his team. When Indiana opened up last year, there was a real sort of determination on the part of Indiana's athletics department and the people running the search to get somebody who'd been a head coach for a while, someone with a career-winning record, someone who'd been a recruiting coordinator, in their past, someone who had coached quarterbacks in their past and coached offense in their past. The belief essentially from Indiana's perspective being Indiana needed to be able to find somebody that could kind of see the whole picture very quickly and was not going to need to grow into the job very much, because this is obviously one of the more difficult jobs in the Big Ten. But on the other hand, Indiana has made significant strides in things like facilities and NIL fundraising and things like that in the last few years. And so there was a feeling from Indiana's perspective, if they could get the right person, I don't know that anybody saw this coming, but that they could kind of flip some things around pretty quickly. And then I think how many crazy high impact transfers did Indiana add? We can kind of have that conversation or that debate, but I do think there was also something to be said for the fact that there was a lot of sort of natural post-coaching change roster turnover that Curt Cignetti and his staff used as an opportunity to, kind of attack the portal for guys that had A, were veterans, and B, had been in winning situations in the past, whether it was coming from James Madison with him and the assistants he brought with him. 6 of his 10 assistant coaches were with him at JMU last year. Or it was, players, a couple players, including Curtis Rourke from Ohio, been to back-to-back bowls. A couple players from Wake Forest who had obviously, had some success in recent years under Dave Clawson. A couple offensive linemen that knew Bob Bostad, the only coach retained from Tom Allen's last tenure, or last coaching staff, I should say. The only coaching staff retained during the coaching change, some players from Wisconsin that had won some games up in Madison, and now we're coming back to play for Bostad and Bloomington. So I think there was kind of this, it's not been any one thing, it's not been like, I grew up in the South, and if I'm trying to think of sort of like the opposite sort of example, it would be like Auburn with Cam Newton, where Auburn just goes and gets a generationally talented player, puts him in the perfect scheme at the right time, and wins a national title. Number one, I'm not predicting Indiana's going to win a national title. Let's be very clear. Number two, it's a little bit like the opposite of that, where Indiana just added all the right levels of all the right ingredients to a formula that, to be fair to Curt Cignetti, has won a lot of games in his career even before he got to Bloomington, and now you're seeing it obviously translate very quickly in the Big Ten.
So Curtis Rourke obviously had the thumb surgery. He's out, but they're optimistic that he could be back as early as, next week or the week after?
Yeah, I mean, they think maybe Michigan State. I think it's, I think it's best I can, and obviously, how college programs are with injuries. Yeah. Sometimes they're sharing, and then sometimes they decide there's a water's edge they stop at. I think the determining factor is essentially just going to be how quickly you can grip a football with real like assertiveness. Because if you can't grip with that thumb, you can't deliver the ball really accurately. He threw, I want to say 4 passes after the injury appeared to occur on Saturday against Nebraska, and you could kind of see there was just a discomfort. He wasn't able to kind of put the full force into the throw, probably because of the pain in his thumb. So it's just going to be a question of, I actually think when he had the thumb surgery, I think my read of the situation is they got in there and maybe found more reasons for optimism than even they thought were sort of previously present. So I think there's a possibility he could play next weekend at Michigan State. Certainly, I think there's at least a possibility he could be back for the Michigan game in 2 weeks. At this point, I don't expect to see him this weekend. I do expect that it will be Taven Jackson starting against Washington, but it does seem like sort of an optimistic case scenario, if that's a phrase. I'm not sure if it is or not, but I think you know what I mean with Curtis Rourke's thumb injury.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, of course, I can't wait till injury reports are obligatory throughout college football. It will make it'll make our job easier. I don't care about the gambling end of it. I'm just curious on your job, our job, the same kind of thing. I just think it's stupid that we have to guess all the time, and you're sitting at a press conference going, "How about now? How about now? Just tell us when."
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it does seem like everything's moving. I know the SEC has the availability. I think the SEC, has started updating theirs midweek.
Mm-hmm.
The Big Ten just does the Saturday availability report. And even that is, still fairly vague, but you at least don't have to get up to the press box and get your binoculars on and try to figure out who's not in pads and, is anybody in a boot or whatever. It would be nice if we just moved in that direction, especially as a lot of this is, frankly, more, I guess probably the word would be professional than it used to be. It does feel like, why can't we all kind of get to this place where, we can share a lot of this stuff much more on the up and up.
With the schedule they've got coming up, Michigan State struggled this year. Michigan obviously is not the Michigan we saw last year. They have no idea who their quarterback's going to be from week to week, from snap to snap, really, depending on how it's going. The only team that they have left that's, at least on the surface, scary is Ohio State. How reasonable is it to think that this team could wind up in the playoffs, even if they don't wind up in the Big Ten championship game?
I mean, listen, I've been pumping the brakes and all that stuff as much as anybody, just sort of saying like, hey, Indiana's just kind of got to go week by week, and the schedule gets gradually tougher as the fall goes on. And I mean, I don't think Nebraska was a Big Ten contender, but if you beat Nebraska, which is a perfectly decent team, they're almost certainly going to beat UCLA this weekend and get bowl eligible. You beat them by 49 points. I mean, at a certain point, you do have to start entertaining these kinds of possibilities. I think Indiana will at least be favored in probably every game. Maybe not Michigan or Michigan. I can see a world where, especially if Rourke doesn't play like a Michigan State, I'm not sure exactly where that line settles, but I wouldn't be shocked. Let's put it this way. I wouldn't be shocked if Indiana's favored in every game it plays this season, with the exception of the trip to Ohio State. Any Big Ten team, I think, that gets to 11-1 is probably going to get into the playoff kind of no matter what that looks like. I remember on our podcast, just like our IU Sports podcast, opening up our preseason show, talking about predictions and outlook and everything, by reading out the Big Ten tiebreakers from an email that they distributed that day, just because I thought it was just a remarkable, like number 5 was, there's some analytics company that basically would just rate the teams and split them up that way. Number 6 was a coin toss. And I just remember thinking, oh, well, this will never matter. And now you're in a situation where, somebody pointed out, I think it was Bill Bender pointed out today, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State could all end up 11-1. And, if you want to see a perfect sort of chaos scenario in when you're trying to sort through tiebreakers, that feels like one. Listen, I know the statistics, the analytics say Indiana's maybe more likely than not to make the playoff. I've covered enough Indiana football to know that the best thing to do for an IU fan is just to worry about the next game, enjoy what's happening, and just kind of see where you settle out. But if I think Taven Jackson can sort of man that position capably at quarterback, for at least a couple weeks. And if you do get Curtis Rourke back, let's say by the Michigan game, much less by the Michigan State game, I don't think there's any reason, if you can stay relatively healthy across the board beyond that, I don't think there's any reason this team can't be aiming at least for 10 wins, which, by the way, would be a program record. That's kind of the territory Indiana's operating in now. But maybe even getting to 11 and being in a position where Indiana is a playoff team come, I guess, are we going to call it Selection Sunday too? I suppose we are. the NCAA tournament has trademarked all that stuff, so maybe we have to call it something else Sunday. But Indiana might well be in that conversation.
I'm a Florida State fan, so for us it was screw you Sunday, but I'm not going to get into that at all. Okay, so Washington this week, that's a team that's, I guess in flux would be the best way to describe them. They're good. They're not great. They've had some things that not, Will Rogers throws for a lot of yards, but does the schedule at least work out, because they haven't played a close game yet? Is this the good part of the schedule to at least have your backup quarterback getting some of those reps in those starts?
Yeah, I mean, maybe at least Saturday. And first of all, I would say in Taven Jackson's defense, the quarterback, I mean, he started 5 games last season at Indiana. The quarterback situation was frankly not handled very well here last season. And that probably isn't surprising when you see just the overall results that Indiana put kind of on the field. But Jackson looked a lot better in the spring game. He frankly probably outplayed Curtis Rourke in the spring game. I understand he was operating with a comfortable lead at home, but he was 7 of 8 for 91 yards and 2 scores against Nebraska. He's a redshirt sophomore. He was a 4-star prospect out of high school. He was a state champion at one of the powerhouse programs up in Indianapolis. There's a lot of pedigree and a lot of arm talent there. And just like Curtis Rourke, who was very good at Ohio, but probably not quite at this level, Jackson has also been working within a system that's very quarterback friendly. That is Mike Shanahan's the play caller. It's Curt Cignetti's kind of scheme. Tino Sunseri is heavily involved as quarterbacks coach. Those 3 together have taken transfer quarterbacks. They've taken young quarterbacks and developed them. They have just a track record of building offenses that tailor really well to what their quarterback needs and what their quarterback's good at. I don't think it's at all unreasonable to think Indiana, for example, should still be favored in this game this weekend. And you talk about Washington. It's funny. There are some parallels between sort of Curt Cignetti taking so much, some players, some coaches, some culture from James Madison and transplanting it at Indiana. Jed Fish has done a lot of the same things with Arizona up in Seattle. Maybe not quite to the same level. I think Washington's dangerous. Obviously, they beat Michigan a few weeks ago. The one big red flag more than anything else, if I'm sort of handicapping this game from a neutral perspective, it's that Washington's run defense has really struggled lately. And Indiana's pass offense has gotten a lot of the attention because of Rourke's performances and because they've had a couple 3 games where they've gone for 350 plus and looked really prolific. But Indiana's run game has been so consistent all year long. They have 10 more rushing touchdowns as a team than any other team in the Big Ten. They lead the Big Ten in rushes of 10-plus yards. They've got 3 different backs, maybe even 4 to some extent. The rotation is kind of 2 at the top plus 1 behind, and then a 4th that they trust if they need to call on him. So they're incredibly deep. They'll constantly be fresh. Washington really kind of got run over a little bit by Iowa a couple weeks ago. We'll see if they fix some things during the bye week. But this is the kind of game where on paper, if you're Indiana, especially the way you ran the ball in Nebraska, you should probably be able to run the ball as effectively, if not more so, against Washington. And then that makes life a lot easier for a quarterback making his first start of the season, stepping in after spending so much time as the backup. And then I really do think, it's hard not to kind of take Curt Cignetti at face value when he says stuff like we're only worried about this game, because you can just see how sort of, intensely focused on the little details Indiana is, how well prepared Indiana is, how sharp Indiana is on those details. But I think also because of the nature of Curtis Rourke's injury and the extent to which he might be able to play against Michigan State, you also take this Washington game just, on its own, worry about that, and then you move forward to the next thing when it's time to move forward to the next thing.
Excellent stuff, Zach. Appreciate your time. Zach Osterman, Indy Star, Indiana undefeated, rolling along so far. Haven't even played a close game yet. Last thing, are you interested to see what happens when they play a close game? Because they haven't. They've not really been, in that position in the fourth quarter where it's like, oh, dear God, what are we going to do? Yeah, I mean, the only one that got that way really was the Northwestern game. They were up 3. They had a big third down kind of midway through the fourth quarter of that game. They were up 3. And I've covered enough Indiana football to look out on the field and sort of say, this is when it sort of
this is when the train untracks a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
In the past for Indiana. And instead, Rourke hit Elijah Surratt for a 20-something yard gain or a 30-something yard gain, and they just punched the ball in from short yardage on the next snap. And then they scored another touchdown late and pulled away. And Cignetti said after that game, he said, this was the first time we really got pushed. This was the first time, he was very pleased after that Northwestern game. In some ways, probably more than he was after the Nebraska game. And I think it was partly for the point you make, which was, hey, it was still a 3-point game into the fourth quarter, had to convert a key third down to keep a drive alive. If Northwestern takes the ball back, they've got the momentum, because I think Indiana had been up 10 if memory serves, and then Nebraska had scored a touchdown. So Indiana's got it back, and if they give it back to Northwestern and Northwestern goes down and scores again, suddenly it feels like that game is sort of, snowballing in another direction. But, listen, I mean, they certainly have not been in a situation where they needed to make a clutch kick or, to your point, a game that's tied in the final 5 minutes or anything like that. At some point you would imagine they're going to wind up in that situation, and it will be interesting to see kind of how they handle it. But I think I think that's why Curt Cignetti felt so good about the way his team played in the fourth quarter against Northwestern, was because he felt like, for the first time all season, and obviously Nebraska didn't really do this to Indiana either, an opponent put Indiana in a position where there was some real peril attached to its execution. And, if you don't convert this third down, this thing could come back the other way real fast and right in our face. And suddenly we're, staring at a deficit on the road, trying to figure out if we've got the stuff it takes to go down and win. We'll see if they get put in that position sometime in the next 2 or 3 games. I think, I said the Nebraska game was a big test of basically whether or not Indiana could at least kind of beat up on the middle class in the Big Ten. Now you've almost got to kind of progressively work your way up toward, Washington, then Michigan State, then Michigan, trying to sort of prove maybe that you are the best of the middle class in the Big Ten and that you deserve a shot at the upper class, which is Ohio State. People aren't used to it around here, but the reality of a winning team is there's never a moment when you're satisfied. There's never a moment when everything is just sort of settled and perfect. You're just constantly trying to see how much higher you can climb, and that's the position Indiana's in right now.
Zach Osterman, Indy Star. Zach, thank you so much. We'll talk to you again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, Zach Osterman with us here. This is 365 Sports.